deep into whatever it is we find interesting. I'm your host, Calvin, and joining me from the desert of Arrakis, it's your co-host, Nick Richardson, and special guest from Suck My Fan Fic, the Kwisatz Haderach himself, Alex Atreides.
Muad'Dib.
Oh, you guys are too kind.
Muad'Dib.
Too kind.
Muad'Dib.
No, I like all the references already. This is going to be great. I'm excited.
We're getting down with it.
In case you didn't read the title or haven't ever listened to Suck My Fan Fic, Alex is here specifically because we're talking Dune. Alex is a super fan. Nick and I have just recently read it for the first time. We're going to talk about Dune.
It's pretty much the only thing I know how to talk about.
And fan fiction.
That too, yeah.
So why don't you, before we get into Dune, tell the listeners, I already know about it, I listen, tell our listeners about Suck My Fan Fic and what they can do with that information.
Okay, so first thing you can do is you can go suck yourself, get it? No, Suck My Fan Fic is a podcast.
Not that vulgar here?
Not that vulgar here?
I'm just kidding. You can be as vulgar as you want.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought I could. So that's a podcast. I was going to say weekly, but LMAO. That's a podcast that me and my buddy Ryan host. We were weekly. One of us might have moved away from New York to do something else. That one's me, so it's blame sort of on me. It's the only way you can get Ryan in the room is if you like corner him and record. And we review, talk about, rate, discuss fan fiction and pop culture and art in general, sort of sometimes. I'm the pretentious douche who likes to get too serious, and Ryan is the one who likes to make the very clever comments that make me laugh too much, and my laugh's annoying. So it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun. We've done a lot of like quote-unquote special episodes too, where we'll actually like write a script, and so we have like a parody of true crime podcasts, because if you listen to podcasts, you know that true crime's like 60% of all podcasts. And we have a parody of a conspiracy theory podcast, and obviously not out of any sort of hate or disdain, but just out of love for those categories and those genres. And we kind of do them with fan things. So they're a lot of fun. And if you want to listen to us, I think we're pretty much everywhere, and we're also on Twitter. And that's pretty much the only social media I keep up with for the show. So find us there, talk to us, and if you like us, you can request us to review a fanfic, typically through Patreon, because otherwise we're kind of busy, and we're only able to record whenever we have free time now. So Ryan works nights, I work at a school. It sucks. So
I'd have to say my favorite episode was the Finding Nemo
crime
noir thriller. That was a great one.
So that
was fan submitted, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that was submitted through our Patreon. That was a lot of fun when we got the notification. There's another podcast that listens to us called Drinkopedia, and those guys are awesome. And Matt, one of the hosts, he wrote a episode or a fic we affectionately refer to as Finding Noirmo, but also it's Finding Nemo 3. He says it's the third in the Finding trilogy, and it's about Marlin going missing, and Nemo has grown up in this like grizzled detective, and so I kind of surprised Ryan with it because I'm the one that manages like the email and the Patreon and everything. So when I got the submission, I was like, oh, we have to do this right. So I tried to read it all grisly as I could, and we put some noir detective music behind it, and we just tried to like really sink our teeth into this amazingly written fic. And the only suggestion that we had to fix it is he wrote that a fish was doing something, and Ryan said to steeple the fins instead of steeple his fingers, and I don't know why, but that's still an inside joke between the two of us. So that's episode 25. Episode 25. I actually know that off the top of my head.
I was gonna say, I like how you remember
any
that
of our episodes.
Nope.
For it.
I don't remember shit.
I'm just like, anytime I try and reference one, I'm like, we did it sometime. Go back and look. There's a whole list.
I think through the first 30, I could probably tell you off the top of my head, and then after that, I'm like, because that's right when I got into grad school, and time doesn't exist, and neither does brain power anymore.
Well, plus 2020, getting into grad school on top of 2020 in general, where time doesn't exist, it's just a shit show.
Yeah, it's been pretty terrible.
Very casually.
That's
been
the
shit,
end.
man.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Yeah, I just consider ending it daily. It's not a big deal.
So we will be spoiling Dune, the first novel.
Yep.
Probably Dune, the movies, just because they're built off of the novel. And Alex later will hopefully be spoiling the entire Dune series, because that's what the bulk of this episode is going to be, is us asking questions about the Dune series, because I don't know that I'm going to read the whole thing.
I hope I can change your mind. I hope by the end of this I've changed your mind.
You might be able to.
I can be swayed. I know that much.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I can definitely be swayed. I got swayed into actually reading the first one rather than it just sitting on my wish list on Audible forever.
Well, that's a big step. That's the longest one.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's the longest one. The second longest one is only like, I don't know, a couple thousand words shorter, but still, it's the longest one. You got all the world building really out of the way, so you did a lot. You're good.
Yeah, I think it was like 25 hours on Audible, something like that.
Oh, it's 21 hours and some change.
There we go.
Yeah, I listen to that shit at 1.2 speed, son.
Yep, I do everything on 1.3. And Alex is really throwing me off right now because I usually listen to Suck My Fan Fic at, I think I listen to podcasts at like 1.6.
Holy shit.
I do podcasts at 1.3 and books at 1.6. So Alex is really throwing me off because his voice is much slower than I'm used to hearing.
It's a good thing you don't like Ben Shapiro. You'd never be able to understand him.
That's true. That'd be rough.
I tried listening to Dune at 1.5 and it was gibberish. I don't understand 1.6. I just couldn't differentiate. I'm like, oh my god, all these fucking words.
Yeah, there's a lot of made up words. So Nick, let's get right into it. What are your initial thoughts on Dune? What are your takeaways?
My takeaways on Dune after my second go around, because the first time I didn't give it the attention it was due, but this time I did, and honestly, I'm not a fan of some of the tropes, like the Messiah complex type thing, but I'm an incredible fan of the writing style, the culture he develops. I really like the language, the linguistics he uses. Fantastic, and the world building is second to none. So I'm really thoroughly impressed with it, but at the same time, it has that one kind of thing that I can't really bitch about because it's very well done.
All right, so I can respond to that immediately. I can already get defensive if you want, or unless you don't want me to.
I was going to defend it for you in saying because this is older than a lot of the stories we're used to. This kind of created that trope in a lot of modern science fiction.
Absolutely.
I can hear that in Alex's voice. He's like, you motherfucker.
No. So that's
I had that in my notes, but I agree. I agree with Nick. Is reading it in 2020 after we've seen so many other things steal from this, it feels very heavy-handed and like, well, yeah, I've seen this in Star Wars. I've seen it in Ender's Game. I've seen it absolutely
literally
everywhere.
Like damn near every bit of media that I consumed as a young man was the Messiah complex, the one guy that saves the world. So it's a tired trope now. There's a lot of them.
Chosen one.
And having not read the book yet, that kind of fucks me up, I suppose. But that's what I took from it.
So I actually shared that sentiment when I first read it. Like I was sitting there and I was like, oh, he's like this one thing, and he's also this other thing, and he's also this other thing. That's really annoying. Who could ever like this guy?
Three chosen ones in one.
Yeah, he's literally, I'm pretty sure he's three chosen ones. And you sit there and you're like, ugh, all right, whatever, I guess. So I felt that initially. I swear I did. I'm not just getting offensive. So Frank Herbert, I've watched, because obviously we said super fan, so I got a little obsessive at one point, and I watched every single interview with Frank Herbert that I could find about this book. And he's the author. I don't know if we stated that.
Obsessive.
He's the author. It's a little obsessive. And one of the things he said is that the main reason that he wrote the book was to warn people against charismatic leaders. So the point of the first book is not that he's the chosen one, or it is that he's the chosen one, but that's not really the point of the later books. The point is you follow this guy who is basically perfect in every single way and is the chosen one like 3 times over. And then you realize just because he's the chosen one doesn't mean he's a good leader, and he's actually really terrible. And all these awful things happen because of him. And he's warning you that you have this guy that is literally perfect 3 times over. But why do you need to rely on him when you can rely on yourself, or you can rely on a smaller community and not this big intergalactic empire? So it's almost like, yeah, that's annoying, and yeah, that has influenced like everything science fiction. But at the same time, it's leading to a bigger place. There's one interview he did.
So that already has me interested in the rest of the story now.
Well, that's good because
they kind of go away from that.
Yes, yeah, like immediately go away from that. Like I think the first chapter of book 2 is just like, yo, this guy kind of sucks.
This dude fucking blows.
So you're saying is MAGA Nation needs to really inherit Dune.
So it's not okay. So I wouldn't just say MAGA Nation. I would say anybody who is really, really easily wrapped up in a charismatic leader, or easily wrapped up in putting your faith that a leader is going to have your best interests at heart, or be able to make the best decision for everybody. And so there's an interview that he has with a news reporter in the early 70s, and the guy's like, well, who's your favorite president? And he's like, Richard Nixon. And the guy's sitting there, and it's like middle of Watergate, and he's like, why? What on earth are you talking about? And he goes, because people loved him, and they realized he was awful. And that's what I wanted to do with my book. Like, I don't want people to sit there and put all their faith in one human being to solve all their problems. That's not going to happen. And so, it's not just the MAGA Nation or all the people that loved Obama when he was president and still do. It's anyone who's attracted to that type of personality to, I don't want to say wake up, but to sit there and realize that, like, maybe I can distance myself from the those love or the interest I have for this person, and kind of like take stock of what's around me. I think that's kind of where he was going with that.
Well, it's for to take stock of, like, that you're following this person for the sake of following the celebrity of them, rather than, okay, what are they actually doing?
Yeah.
And I could definitely feel that reflection on, early communism or the Nazis, things like that. That is definitely in the text, where you can see it even in this first one,
mm-hmm.
and how they kind of all gravitate towards him. And even with the Harkonnens, there's a little bit of that as well. You see that they just kind of flock to the Harkonnen leaders because they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see how they could follow on that.
I just want to give a big thumbs up because you did pronounce Harkonnen correctly.
It helps
because
with
I
Audible.
listened to it on Audible.
Yes.
So,
I would have
some
never pronounced anything correctly.
Yeah, some of the readings have mispronunciations. Harkonnen is typically mispronounced. People say Harkonnen.
I see. So my initial thoughts were kind of along the same lines as Nick's. I enjoyed it. I got into it, but I was never really on the edge of my seat, just kind of waiting to get back into it to see what happens next, like I was with A Song of Ice and Fire or Harry Potter, until the last, like, 5 chapters probably of Dune.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was like, okay, I gotta see what happens. I gotta know right, really when that rise is occurring. And I think that's just something that I feel about sci-fi versus fantasy in general. This is science fiction, straight up.
100%,
whereas A Song of Ice and Fire, Harry Potter, those are fantasy stories. I like the worlds that are built, but I think I like the fantasy elements better. Those really grab me in and stay glued to it. There is some fantasy elements, but it's not as heavy as in those other stories that I really love and come back to.
So I can say I'm so glad you brought up the sci-fi fantasy difference. So this is something that I've been on a kick on lately, and on a tear on lately, and it's basically the fact that I've made the argument before that science fiction is a genre of anxiety, and science fiction is a genre of fear typically. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions. Please don't at me in the chat, everybody. Like, yes, you can find one book that isn't going to follow what I'm saying. I understand. You can find multiple. But in general, that's what it is. And in general, fantasy is a genre of morality or morals. And I would not call, and as much as I love science fiction, I would not call Dune a purely science fiction piece of work or piece of literature. I think Frank does something that is sort of a cop-out, but at the same time works. And there's no reason to criticize it because it works so well, which is he sets it so far into the distant future that things that seem impossible are possible because technology or because of something else, and good try. I mean, there's something pretty fantastical about Paul being able to see the future, and he's not seeing the future because of some supercomputer. He's taking a drug and he can see what's going to happen before it happens.
I found that to be actually more plausible than like a supercomputer, which is an odd thing, just because that far into the future, you think if you travel across the galaxies in that, that regard, humanity is going to find something of that nature. I mean, shit, we got movies and stuff about it, obviously, but I don't know. There was a couple things
Simpsons
about
predict
this.
Everything in the future.
Well, At least one guy will.
Matt Groening, Muad'Dib now?
I hope so.
Yeah, but
that'd be fucked up.
But look at that. You literally just said it. I mean, I obviously you weren't disagreeing, but you said, yeah, it's so far in the future, it's plausible. So it does this thing where it's taking these fantasy elements and these fantastical ideas, and it's plausible because you're like, oh, well, it's so far into the future, it's possible. You know, you're like, I'm not going to question it too much, and that's beautiful because comparing that to something like Blade Runner, which Blade Runner already happened, you know, it's set in 2019.
Yeah.
It dates itself immediately. It dates itself immediately, but that's not what Frank does. Instead, he goes, well, I hope my book is around 15,000 years from now. You know what I mean?
It's a long shot,
and
but we'll go for it.
If it is, they'll think Frank Herbert was God or something.
Maybe he is. We don't know
At that
yet.
point, Dune will be a religion at that point, if it's still around in 15,000 years. Like I said, I listened to it on Audible. The majority of the narration there was done by Scott Brick. There were a lot of others providing voice work for different characters.
Randomly. It was weird.
Yeah. It was really great to listen to, but it was hard to keep track of all the made-up words.
Yeah.
I had to buy the Kindle version separate so I could look up the words in the appendices and kind of read along sometimes.
Yep.
I found myself most drawn to Arrakis itself as a world and the world building there, along with the Fremen and what's going on with them and how they're trying to terraform the land, make it livable, and how they kind of kept the Empire at bay for so long so they could work on it. To me, all of that was much more interesting than anything going on with Paul.
Oh, dude, 100%.
Than most of the stuff going on with Paul. There were some things where I was like, okay, Paul's doing some cool shit right now.
Right.
But for the most part, I was like, where did these Fremen come from? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? Why is Arrakis like this? Who are the Harkonnens? Why are they in there? You know, all that stuff was much more interesting than the Chosen One arc, as Nick alluded to earlier.
Well, shit,
so,
dude,
boy, do I have good news for you.
Oh, I hope that gets better, but I agree with you,
Straight world
Calvin,
building for
100%.
16 more.
There's a shitload of books, but the fact that I was most interested in the political intrigue and just the culture that was the Fremen, and at the same time, you mentioned A Song of Ice and Fire earlier. I can't stand the mass exposition that George R.R. Martin does when I think back on it now that I've listened to this, because the way he delivers exposition,
he's definitely snappier.
It's very, very, it's subtle. It's subtle and...
Well, and this is, so Dune is probably 9 hours shorter than, in listening on Audible, 9 hours shorter than A Game of Thrones.
Ooh.
And that's all just added on bullshit that George R.R. Martin kind of puts in between thing of painting the full picture. And it's not just painting the picture where you know where you are, it's painting the picture behind the picture that's also behind this other picture.
And who painted all those pictures, and their parents.
Yes, and then what their parents did for a living before they had the kid who painted the picture. That painted the other picture. That's George R. R. Martin. And I love A Song of Ice and Fire, but
definitely,
it does get bogged down in very minute details that probably aren't important.
I was getting visibly upset listening to Dune because it's just like, oh my god, this is so good. Its flow is fantastic. And I have pretty much daily A Song of Ice and Fire conversations with one of my buddies because he is listening to the whole series on Audible for the first time, and it's
that's a fun time.
Well, he's been listening to it for 6-7 weeks now. Long time.
I just want to say, can we get an Audible sponsorship? I mean, you guys have brought it up so much. Can we get one? Are you listening to Amazon? Come on.
I think we have an Audible promo code that you get like a free month if you use our promo code. It's probably audible.com/podcast about something. So there you go.
Plug it, dude. Let's do it.
Get like $1 if anybody signs up.
Well, there you go. I'll sign up and I'll
sign
get
up right
the
now.
Sandman.
There we go.
So I've never actually read A Song of Ice and Fire. I have like the worst relationship with that franchise because I never had HBO. And when I was finally able to get it, it was like literally the last season. And you know, I didn't have time to binge the whole thing. What's up?
I just said, oh.
Calvin just sounds so horrified. It's like, oh.
So you only watched the last season?
No. So I did it even worse. I was like, all right, let's binge the first season. We got to the second, and then it was like a couple days later was going to be the last episode. And I was like, I'm going to get spoiled. And I'm just like so hard-headed, so I was like, the only one who's going to spoil this show for me is me. So I watched the last episode as it aired.
Oh no!
And I'm like, all right, cool. I don't need to watch the rest of the show if it's going to end like this. So I stopped after season
fair.
2.
You lucky son of a bitch! I spent so many hours on that
everything
fucking show.
interesting in the show happens in the first 4 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that stuff is in those 5 books, and the books are so amazing at how, like we said, it's over deep sometimes, but the depth of the story and the world building is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's really great to connect the dots and then watch some random theory videos and listen to old episodes of a podcast about something where we discuss Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire.
I've done that a lot.
There's no part of the show that does the books justice completely.
Well, it's good. That's really nice.
They have a shitload more characters too in the books that,
right,
you know, from their point of view than Dune does. So I can see where all that extra exposition may help, but sometimes, dude, when you're 15 pages deep into someone's fucking room, it's just like, oh my god. Can we move on? I don't have any more time to sit on the shitter. I gotta go. I'm trying to see some shit happen.
So I'm glad you brought up Frank's writing, because at the end of the day, I think that's really what attracts people to this property. Like, I think he did a lot that was great, but at the same time, you have the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. You have the Hyperion. Is it Hyperion? God, I'm going to hate myself. Yeah. Hyperion trilogy by Dan Simmons. And these are all things that are, like, similar. So it's like, you know, if there are other options out there, what attracts us to Dune? And I think it's Frank's writing. And, you know, one of the first rules you learn with writing, or that some people like to hammer down, I don't really care, is like show, don't tell. And there's a lot of telling in this story, especially when you get that just amazingly written, those conversations where someone will say something and then they'll think something, and you're knowing what's going on in these people's heads, and they're talking to each other, and you know, like, they're just playing this game with each other, and it's just like this cat and mouse that you're privy to, and you love it. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do. To give you context, it took him 8 years to write this book. At one point, his wife was working full time, so he could write his book while they had 3 kids. So, you know, maybe he could have been a little more responsible, but it gave us what we got, so I can't really complain.
Yeah, this was a long time ago. I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, and the thing is...
I mean, he is dead.
Exactly, yeah. His other books are really good, too. None of them obviously took off. The ones that aren't in the Dune series. None of them took off like this. I've only read two others in his bibliography. The first one is White Plague, which is about a plague, and I read that in February, so that was a very convenient time for me to read that book. And
yeah, I bet, man.
The other one was, it's called Soul Catcher. And it's, because he's from the Pacific Northwest, it's about a Native American who becomes a soul catcher, which is something in one of the lores of the tribes up there. And he kidnaps the son of a politician, and they kind of go on this journey through the woods while they're getting hunted. And I thought it was great. It was met with mixed reviews. It's still kind of seen with mixed reviews because it has a very prominent Native American character. Frank Herbert isn't Native American. Obviously, people have problems with that nowadays. But his writing is pretty impeccable all the way around.
He is a fantastic writer. His just use of, I don't know, like I've said exposition a million fucking times, but the words he uses, the phonetics of it are fantastic. I fucking love it. Like, I don't know.
There's a poetic nature to it almost in some cases.
Well, I mean, it's obviously based on Middle Eastern language, and that's what I took from it.
It's partially Middle Eastern language. Yeah,
that's where I got the big hints from. But it's everything kind of rolls off the tongue really well. Mm-hmm. Just from looking from the spelling of things, I had no idea how to pronounce it, but hearing it and putting that together, that helps a shitload. And you know, I think of the big difference I find, I keep going back to A Song of Ice and Fire, is the Wizards of Karth. When I read that and then heard it, I hated it. I don't know why, but I fucking hated it. Didn't have that at all with Dune.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
There's some weird words.
I mean,
a lot of weird words.
Think about the first few chapters in Dune. You're presented with something called a Kwisatz Haderach, and you don't really know what that is. And it's from a organization called the Bene Gesserit, and they're testing people with this thing called the Gom Jabbar, and you're just like, God, this is another language, but I want to learn the language. You know what I mean? Like, you get
Yeah.
so intrigued, and it pulls you in with this mystery. It's like if J.J. Abrams' mystery box storytelling was actually good. Like, that's what it is, you know?
Oh, 100%.
I was
That analogy was
exactly
so...
there. Listening to that first chapter, I'm just like, what the fuck are these people talking about?
Yeah. And
I had no idea, but I understood the context of everything, but the words were gibberish. But I understood, like, he was testing himself to become some special type of person who could do special things. And I was like, I'm sure all the blanks will be filled in later. And they mostly were, but there was, I was probably 15 chapters in before I downloaded the Kindle version and started looking up things in the appendix. But then I didn't want to look up too much because I didn't want to spoil. So I only tried to look at words that I had already knew I heard and had heard a couple times. And there was the Cuisart's Atarak was one. And then what's the other word that they use? The Atreides use a different word for the chosen one, don't they?
Oh, they
Or
do,
the
but
Fremen, it's the Cuisart's Atarak, and then the Bene Gesserit use a different word.
The Bene Gesserit is Kwisatz Haderach. The Fremen. Oh God, I have one of my copies. I have like 4 or 5 copies of just the first book. So
before I butcher it more, is it Frenem or Fremen?
It's supposed to be an abbreviation of free men, because they're
Fremen.
They have,
I have it spelled wrong everywhere.
They have a history where they are basically like intergalactic refugees, and they were kind of getting tossed between planet to planet, and then they were given the one planet that nobody wanted, which was Arrakis.
Right.
And this was thousands of years ago, and then they learned to adapt. And you know, I as an anthropologist, I hadn't mentioned that, but that's what I do. This book says so much about culture, and the Fremen are a very good example of like culture building in books, and I can tell you 100% that there have been college classes taught just about this book for literature and anthropology's sake. So
I could see that, and they should.
That's what I honestly love most about Dune, and I did a lot of anthropology schooling myself.
Let's do it, boy.
That sounded dumb as fuck. Let's do it, son.
Do it,
son.
A couple months from now, a podcast about anthropology with just Nick and Alex. I'll check myself out of that one. Thanks, guys.
Tap me in, coach. Let's do it.
I think that would be fantastic. But yeah, their culture was so well developed, centered. I mean, he had that one focal point, and I think that was like the mitigating factor between every part of his book was, like you mentioned with the language, you can kind of decipher things initially, like the Kwisatz Haderach and stuff like you get it. It's a Messiah type deal. It's a special person. You could boil it down to like a 1 or 2 word definition initially, and then he fills it in later beautifully. It's he does that a couple times throughout.
Oh, there were a million words that's what kind of took me so long to download the Kindle version, because I felt like I was getting the context around a lot of things. But as you get the context around those first few things you're introduced to, he introduces more and more as you go. And it's really great, and having both versions was definitely helpful, because you get the pronunciation, you get the visual backing to it as well. And then once 2024 comes around and we get Timothée Chalamet as Muad'Dib, then we'll really have it all.
Oh yeah, and think about we're talking about the beginning. Think about this: you're introduced to Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck, who has the Inkvine scar and plays the Balisette and is the warrior poet for the House Atreides. And you're like, these things are so cool. What do they mean? Like, what is a Balisette? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it at least boiled down to, in my mind, it's like, okay, this dude sounds like a musically talented cowboy with swords. Like, I'm down with this shit.
Yeah, and it's played by Josh Brolin in the new movie. What a better cat!
Oh, it's gonna
find
be
a better
so
cast,
dude.
We'll talk about the movie in a little bit, but it looks so well casted.
That's
the first thing I can say for it.
And I think there's something to say about that.
I want to point out too that this has nothing to do with the movie, but we're talking about the poetry, the language, and how he writes things so well. Explain to me how one of the most like exciting and engaging chapters, and it's not knocking the other chapters, this one's just so well written, is of a dinner party. Like, were you guys as drawn into the dinner party as I was? Because you sit there and there are these things going back and forth and just clicking.
There were a lot of things going on.
And you learn that Paul is actually capable of being this Game of Thrones-esque plotter and planner, and you're just like, I am into it. It's a lot of fun. That's a
that was really
great chapter.
Oh,
There's a lot of things going on, and everything that happened there played a role down the road for some. Everything that you learned in that scene helped out more later.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I honestly, my favorite chapters, none of which included like major fight scenes or battles or super big, set piece type things. Like I did love the raid on the Atreides compound on Arrakis.
Oh, yeah.
And I did love the, spoiler alert, the very end of it, but most of the development in between is what I was interested in.
When he and Jessica were first trapped out in the desert, I liked that and how they adapted to that and how they moved forward. When they first came into contact with Stilgar's clan, not necessarily the fight between him and the dude that challenged him. I don't remember what his name was. But just them interacting with that clan of Fremen.
Jameson?
Yeah, Jameis, I think.
Jameis, yeah.
Yeah.
Jameis Winston out there.
Jameis Winston stealing crab legs, yeah.
Yeah. Those were the most interesting parts when they were first faced with adversity and how they faced that adversity and overcame it. And the dinner scene also, the dinner party scene was amazing. And also the first lesson we saw, the combat training lesson, I think is what it was.
Yep.
It was
when he fights the robot,
within the first. Yeah, I thought that was really good too.
Yeah, I just found it in the glossary. It is Lisan al-Gaib.
Al-Gaib.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. And then he
Al-Gaib.
also gets called by his girlfriend, future wife, and baby mama, Usul. He also has another name.
From Cheney.
Yeah.
And that was one I never looked up. That was just like my love, is what I always thought.
I believe it means the bottom rock on a pillar, which means it's the strongest one.
Gotcha.
It holds the rest of the pillar up.
Because I thought the other family that he like inherited from Jameis, I thought they called Jameis that, and then he had to like replace Jameis in that family structure now.
Yeah, so I think that's why they called him
killed
Usul.
Jameis. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I'm pulling the glossary out again. So if there's
you better just keep that thing handy.
Oh, trust me, it is. So the thing is, if there's a gap in the knowledge, it might mean Fremen, the base of the pillar, Usul. If there's a gap in knowledge, it might mean it's not as important in the later books.
That makes sense.
That makes any sense. Yeah.
All right.
So
I want to make sure. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to move the conversation along. You're the one doing the interview, so make sure. Let's do it.
Yeah, this is our show here, Alex. You just sit back.
I'm so sorry.
Relax. You're the chosen one. That doesn't mean you get to do everything.
I'm so sorry.
Jeez, Calvin.
It's okay. So I wanted to make sure I understood what happened all in that last scene. I do need to go back and do a reread or a re-listen, reframing it, because a lot of the time I went through the first time, I was waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that nothing is happening. But it's like Nick said, is the things that happen aren't these big action set pieces. I was waiting for him to fully embrace that chosen one identity, and that doesn't happen until like the 5th to last chapter, where he's like, fuck it, I'm this dude, I'm going after it. So I need to re-listen and kind of frame my mind around it of like, this isn't the story about him being the chosen one, it's the story of how he gets there.
Do you think he actually embraces it?
Right before they go in and storm the Harkonnen, he does, because he feels that's what the Fremen need him to embrace it, so they will follow him.
See, that's where I gotta say,
I don't know that he thinks he is, but
yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
He definitely stands up in front of the Fremen and says, "I'm the chosen one. We're gonna go take these motherfuckers down. Let's go."
So, I'll not to get too far into the next book, but one of the things that you find out about Paul is that he doesn't actually want any of these things. And so you really actually start to feel for him, and he feels less like a messiah, and he feels more like a human being, because you realize he was put into a position he had no control over, asked to do very unfortunate things that you shouldn't be asking of a child, but he does them because they're his duty and his responsibility. But he's kind of like trapped in this system of violence, this system of of royalty and all these other things. And he's really only playing a part that was set up for him thousands of years ago by these space witches.
Yeah, the Bene Gesserit witches.
Yeah. So
And
that's why
I could feel that.
You feel what?
I could feel that early on, even with him needing to become the Duke. You really feel that of he's not ready for that. That's not necessarily the life he wants. And he also has this the Bene Gesserit blood that he knows is there. You can feel that kind of in the beginning before Duke Leto dies and they, flee the city and all of that. You feel that he's not ready to be the chosen one. He knows that he's going to have to be, but he doesn't necessarily want it at that time. And that only grows as the story grows, but eventually he accepts it. I don't know if he embraces it, but he accepts it.
Yeah. And
I think he sees like where the roads go and it always ends in this fucking jihad. And,
yes.
If he can grab hold of the reins, I think he convinces himself, or at least tries to, because he constantly reminds himself throughout the book about, the jihad and what's coming and how he can work to stop it and control the Fremen. And yeah, I don't know.
So that gets me, I want to ask the question, what were your guys' take on the seen into the future thing? Because it gets fleshed out a lot more later on, and like I said, I've listened to a few interviews with him explaining it a little bit better. So like, what were the ways you guys saw the seen into the future?
I honestly, it reminded me of like walking down. It reminded me of the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Like you walk down that hallway, and different doors will take you into different lives,
futures.
Different realities.
Yes. And he can see
timelines.
different parts of each future at different times based on, and he can almost see. So he has that first vision when they're stuck in the desert and, they're breathing in all that spice all night and don't realize it. He has that first vision where he sees so far into the future that he realizes he must lead the jihad, blah, blah, blah. But then he makes decisions later that he realizes that vision of the future becomes blurry. So it's almost the future isn't set in stone, and he can control it to some extent, but he can't control. It's probably not the right word.
Yeah.
He can sense the changes in it, I guess. He can't
He
make
can
a
get
change
full
happen, but
view.
he knows when a change is happening.
So I'll break it down a little further. You're walking down the hallway with all these doors open, and you catch little glimpses, like in a hotel, you catch little glimpses of their mirror or their TV or something like that. That's what I feel like his timeline, experiences. And when he stands directly in front of the door and is looking in, that's when he can see everything, like you mentioned, Calvin. But if he just keeps on moving, then he'll never fully embrace what the fuck's going on in each individual room. If that makes any sense.
I feel you.
I feel you. Okay.
So
I guess
I won't correct that interpretation. I'll amend it and I'll try to elaborate a little bit.
You can correct it.
Because I don't think it's really off the mark. But so have you had the podcast about something episode yet on Schrodinger's cat and quantum physics? Have we gotten that far yet?
No, we haven't dove into that. No.
Oh, come on, guys.
That's season 15.
Okay. Well, if you want me on for that one too, I'd be no help whatsoever because I really only know this much. But the Schrodinger's cat idea that it gets talked about.
Yes.
So it's
I've
like
seen The Big Bang Theory.
I was going to say The Big Bang Theory explained it very poorly in my opinion, but it's basically you put a cat in a box and there's like a poison tablet in it, and when you're not looking at the box, it simultaneously exists as a live cat and a dead cat. Okay, but the poison tablet can explode at any time and kill the cat. So until you observe what the cat is simultaneously dead and alive. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
And then the moment you open the box and you see the cat, you know what the answer is because you've observed it. And so that happens with particle physics and quantum physics, where these particles can exist as different things until they're observed, and then they can only exist as that. And so to take that concept a little bit further, people have thought with theoretical physics and stuff like that. I'm by no means a theoretical physicist, but that the universe is existing in the way that it's existing because we are here to observe the universe existing in that manner. So if you take that further and you assume that time is linear, but time is not set in stone yet, what happens when someone can peer into the future and observe? You're setting the future in stone. You're actually creating like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you're not getting all the details. I think it's described in the book, I don't remember if it's 1 or 2, that he's standing on top of a mountain peak and he can see the tops of other mountains, but he can only see the valley that's right in front of him, and he can't see the valleys beyond the other mountains. So he's observing this future, or these possible futures, as mountain peaks, and he's just getting glimpses into what they're going to look like, but he doesn't have all the details. And because he observes them, exactly, and because he observes them, they're set in stone. He can't change them. And that's sort of the issue when you get further into the books, is the more spice that he takes, and the more that he can see the future, the more that he cannot change the future. And so just by the sheer fact that he observed that there was going to be a jihad, he set in stone that the jihad was going to happen. It was just a matter of how it was going to happen, when, and why, and to what extent.
That was fantastic.
Well done.
I appreciate it.
God damn, sir, that was a mouthful, and you executed it perfectly.
I'm sorry if it was a little too much. Not
at all. No,
okay.
I mean, you explained it in a way that I was able to follow 100%, and I was just kind of sitting here just like, yeah, okay, I see that.
All makes sense.
I'll start my theoretical physics YouTube channel, next month or something when I have a break.
Can't wait.
But yeah, so that's sort of the way that Frank interpreted looking into the future, and that becomes so big in 3 and 4. 3 and 4 is nothing but that concept, basically, not really explained that way, but that's sort of how I've come to see it. And just to give a quick backstory on the spice itself, Frank, when he was a kid, by the way, one of his cousins was Joseph McCarthy, and that's why he hates politicians, or hated politicians. But when he was a kid, a younger, I don't think he was like a baby or a child, but when he was in his early 20s, someone gave him mushrooms without him knowing it. And, he was seeing into the fourth dimension or whatever, and was experiencing these weird things, and that gave him the idea for the spice. And that's what gave him the idea for, seeing into the future and everything. So that's where this weird drug that smells like cinnamon and turns your eyes blue comes from.
Interesting. It all comes back to shrooms.
It does.
Well, he sounds like a pretty smart cat, and the fourth dimension is light, correct? And with the fourth dimension,
time.
You can move on the directional. So.
Fourth dimension's time.
Yeah,
I thought it was light.
I don't think light's a dimension.
No, light's a photon. Light is a
sort of
a particle.
Maybe I'm just misremembering the verbiage of Einstein's theory.
He definitely says time is a fourth dimension because time's relative.
I fucked that up.
You guys are way over my head now. That's
all right.
Well, he uses it in a theory for God, and I believe it. Yeah, I think you're right. It is time.
Yeah. I wanted your guys' thoughts on what the seeing into the future thing is, because like I said, it's not as well fleshed out in book 1 as it becomes in the other books. So I just wanted to see where we were on that.
Nice. So let's wrap up the first book. I want to make sure I understood the ending, and then we've got some questions about the future of the series that Alex will hopefully answer for us. Not super in-depth, but enough to give us the information and kind of know what's going to go on for the rest of the story, whether we read it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of book 1, Dune, Paul takes over as emperor. And this was my interpretation of everything. Paul takes over as emperor, leaves Arrakis to Stilgar, marries the princess Irulan, who was the previous emperor's daughter, and she also is writing and or telling these stories as prescribed to her from all these different people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. He keeps Chani as type of paramour, kind of like Jessica was with the Duke Leto.
Mm-hmm.
His son really actually died, as far as we know, at the end of book 1. And his 4-year-old sister is out there just knifing down Harkonnens, and she's an abomination, more powerful than Paul or any of the other Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers. Is that all correct?
The stuff about Aliyah it's Aliyah. The stuff about Aliyah, that's a sister. Isn't. So this is when Frank was writing the book. He was going to kill her off in the first book, and I don't remember if it was his editor or his wife said, "Why don't you keep her in? Maybe you could take her somewhere else." So he didn't kill her off. So that whole stuff about her being an abomination is true. But the stuff about her being more powerful isn't particularly true, and I can elaborate on that if you want.
But that's what they think at this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted to wrap it up. Is this is
Yeah.
the only thing we've read? This is the only thing anyone knows.
Yeah.
What do we know at the end of book 1?
And you're right on the money for all that. So he leaves Arrakis. Paul leaves Arrakis to Stilgar to just manage, but Paul makes the imperial capital become Arrakis. So he never leaves the planet.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just meant leave Stilgar in charge of Arrakis.
Yeah.
Nick, at this point right now, do you plan on continuing to read the other books?
I don't.
Okay.
Okay. Me neither.
I don't because I'm worried that I look at this as so good, and I've heard very mixed things about the rest of the books. I'm extremely worried it's going to cheapen my experience with the first book, because honestly, I've listened to it twice. I plan on buying a physical copy of the book and reading it, and I'm going to start listening to it again probably on Monday, because I'm really curious to figure out a couple more things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm not, as of right now, Alex can still change my mind. I'm not planning on reading the next 7 or 8, however many there are. I was never, like I said, it's a great story, just never completely lost in it. And right now I can't imagine the other 8 books capturing my imagination in that way. I'll definitely re-listen to this one someday, but right now I've moved on into some different worlds. I'm going through Hitchhiker's Guide series right now.
Oh, hell yeah.
Ready Player
Those are
2
good.
just came out. That's one. Ready Player 1 was one of my favorite books, so I've got to read Ready Player 2 now that that's out. I know the issues with Ready Player 1. I don't care. I liked it.
No, I'm saying Ready Player 2.
Yeah.
Ready Player 1 was fantastic. I read that shit in a day. It was a
I
great
thought
book.
that was Alex making that noise at me.
No, I didn't make it.
No, that was me.
Yeah.
From
that
his...
was me.
Oh, okay.
That was in Nick.
You don't want to watch. You don't want to read Ready Player 2, or have you read it already?
I tried reading a couple sample chapters / synopsis of it, and it just sounded kind of fucky. But the first one sounded fucky as well. But what I'm hearing about it is it's just absolute trash. So I'm
It can't be
kind of
worse than the movie
inclined.
that was made.
That was difficult. It was a difficult movie to get through, but they showed Spartans on screen, so I was like,
I think the movie would have been good had I never actually read the book. I think
I
I
don't
could
even
have
know
gotten
about
into
that,
it.
dude.
Yeah, that's true. I read the first book, and there's like 7 of them of the series called Off to Be the Wizard. And that's a lot of fun. This guy in modern time figures out that the world is a construct. It's a computer program, and he figures out how to hack into the program. And he gets caught trying to steal money, so his escape plan is to go back into medieval times and pretend to be a wizard. He takes a smartphone with him so he can continue hacking into the world's code and just changing shit as he wants. And when he gets there, he realizes all these other people have done the same thing. And there's a whole community of wizards who have made the same realizations and gotten back there from different time periods. So it's really fun, and I want to read the rest of that because that's just like a really fun, simple world to live in.
That sounds great.
Sometimes that's nice.
Yeah.
It's really great, and Merlin, some guy goes back and tries to become Merlin, and he's just this absolute douchebag. It's hilarious.
I like that.
Yeah. So yeah, the first time I read Game of Thrones, I couldn't wait to get to the next one and the next one and see, now I'm just going to be waiting forever for the last 2, but I just wanted to dive in that world, find out as much as I could. I had watched parts of the show first, and I just wanted more and more. I never felt like that with Dune. I want to know what happens. I want to kind of see where it goes, but I don't feel like I need to read 8 books to find that out. I'm good talking to Alex, reading the Wikipedia summaries, whatever I need to do.
That's where I'm at.
But I'm excited for the 2021 movie.
Okay,
hopefully.
Dude.
So if we're talking about the
2021, hopefully.
the expanded
Let's do
Duneverse, which includes the ones written by his son, there are 20 total. If we're counting Frank's, there are 6.
Okay.
That's a shitload of books.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like I could spend a couple weeks spending a bit of free time each day, even just looking at the wiki for Dune.
Yeah.
You know, looking up words and the meaning
learning things
behind
there.
it. Like, I watched a fucking hour-and-a-half video today on YouTube about the timeline for Doom, and it was fucking
It's
fantastic.
insane, yeah.
It was great.
Well, okay, so there's some discrepancies
that.
with the timeline. It depends on who you talk to, but I'm sure the one you watched was right.
It was really long, so I'm gonna give it to him.
Long.
I think he put the effort in. It was kind of dry, but I'm alright with that. I wasn't doing much.
So this is what were we gonna say?
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, so this is the point with you saying like you read the one and you kind of don't know if you want to fall into the rest. So, like I said, this is sort of Frank's like big break. He had written other books before this. They weren't super well received. And if you look at this contextually when it was written, Frank Herbert grew up on pulp magazines and like the golden age of sci-fi and all those cheap, campy, fun things. And, he was growing up reading, Amazing Science, all these other, little tiny publications, the science fiction magazines that are great. And he wanted to write something that he wanted to write, which was Dune. And he wrote this absolute and total brick. If you can't tell, it's extremely long. And nothing like that was popular at the time. And so he kind of, struggled for a while to get it published. And he shopped it around to all of these different publishing companies, and none of them wanted it because it was so long. Like, they were like, yo, this is great. We actually really like it. Can you split it up into 2, 3, 4 books? And he said, I'm already not including one part that I want to include. No. Because Dune Messiah was actually supposed to be the 4th part of the first Dune book. It was actually supposed to end with Dune Messiah.
Oh.
And the reason that he ended it the way that he did is because he said he wanted you to feel like you were skidding out of the book, that you had all this momentum that had just been gained at the end of the book.
It feels like you reached this peak. Like I said, I was waiting for something to happen, and it's finally happening. He's, from what we can see, he's embracing his role. He goes on, he takes on the Harkonnens, and then
that's
it just
the end
ends.
of the book.
He takes a seat as the Emperor's throne, and then it's done. And I was almost like, well, what's next? But I also didn't care that much.
So
he did a great job of skidding out of the book.
No, and that's what he wanted it to be, because he wanted you to want to read the second book, which obviously didn't work on you two. But he, in that time,
gotcha, Frank.
In that time, he actually cut down the however many 100,000 words, and wrote a 90,000 word version called Spice Planet, which was going to be published as a pulpy serial because he didn't have any other options, he thought. And luckily, he went to a auto manufacturer repair publishing company called Chilton Books, and all they did was publish like how to take apart your engine and put it back together. And the editor there was a friend of his and had grew up loving the same science fiction magazines that Frank did, and said, what, this is different than what's being published. It's going to cost me so much on the front end to even print this thing and bind it, but I believe in it, and let's do it. And it was probably the best decision that guy ever made. And then Chilton very quickly became a science fiction publisher after that. So
I think you'd have to.
Yeah, exactly. You publish the
imagine all
science
these
fiction
auto
novel
repair guys who are just waiting for the next Chilton release, and all of a sudden, boom, Dune shows up.
Just a brick.
Wait, which part of my car is the Muad'Dib?
Exactly.
Ganja bar? I've never heard of that.
If this wants to like really just kind of make it weird for you, Lord of the Rings was published, the first one, in 1955. And I think by the time they were all published, it was early 60s. 1954, and then 55 was when the last one was published, because they all got published like back to back to back. And then the first time they were all published
Lord of the
together.
Rings was published in 2001.
2001.
By Peter Jackson.
Very sorry, yeah.
That's it.
But it's only 10 years removed from Lord of the Rings. So we're kind of reaching this pinnacle of sci-fi and fantasy where people are taking a lot bigger risks than they did before. And Frank was really one of the first people to kind of step out of that comfort zone and do something a little weirder. And it wasn't all just like robots and the corporation owning everything. It was something totally different. And I'm always a proponent of not only reading books but reading books contextually. And like we said at the beginning of the podcast, like knowing that all these other things stole the chosen one trope from Dune. It kind of you realize just how important it is. So you skid out of the book, and you're supposed to want to keep reading, because that's kind of what happened to me. And I'll tell you, when I finished the book the first time, I was like, I'm not going to get sucked into these things. Like, I really enjoyed the first one. I'll read the wiki of the second one, and I'm sure I won't care about the rest.
Nick and I will be right there 3 years from now.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I read the wiki, and I was like, I guess that's pretty interesting. And then because Google is actually our corporate overlord, I got suggested a scene from the Sci-Fi channel production of Dune, and I watched it, and I was like, man, that's pretty good. And then I watched another one from the Children of Dune miniseries that they did, which combines Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, and I was like, Dune Messiah is just the shortest one. I guess I could get through it pretty quick. And when I went into it, I read that it was the one that people hated the most out of the original 6. And I was like, why is this so bad? Like, my intrigue, like, I'm kind of like interested in this too. And so, why is it so bad? Because it knocks Paul right off of his pedestal, and it humanizes him in the most horrific way. And you kind of like, you go from the first book where he is the emperor of the galaxy and a million other things. And spoiler, can I give a spoiler about the second?
Let's not get into that.
Okay.
Let's do that in a minute.
Okay. So I was going to say, so I read the second one and I was like, oh, well, that was actually really good. The second one's my second favorite book of the series. I was like, well, that one's really good. I guess I'll read the third one. Third one is normally considered one of the better ones. I didn't care for the third one. But the third one ends really weird. Again, I guess we'll get into it when we get into it. And I was like, I guess I'll do the fourth. And eventually I was like, whatever, I'll just do all of them. And then that's kind of where I ended with it.
Like, fuck it, I'm on this slide already. Let's keep going.
Pretty much. Now I own, and since it's my least favorite, it makes no sense just because it's cheap. The sci-fi serials that Children of Dune was published in 4 parts, I own all 4 parts of them from the early 70s. So I have them up on my bookshelf.
That's some serious prized possession shit right there.
It's pretty cool. I'm a fan.
Hopefully you didn't have to pay a big, pretty penny for those, but still, it'd be awesome to get something unique like that.
Yeah. I think I spent $40 for all 4 of them, so.
That's not bad at all, man.
No. And they're in great condition, too, so there's no complaints here.
Hell yeah.
So, Alex, what made you want to read Dune? When did you start reading it?
So it was a couple things. I always kind of knew that it was the thing that influenced Star Wars, and I have a really weird relationship with Star Wars. If you listen to Suck My Fan Fic, you'd know that. It's one of those things that I think I'm just obligated to love, just as a nerd. And
because it's awesome? Yeah, I get it.
Because it's awesome, and I grew up, and the prequel trilogy was like my Star Wars, and the third episode is still my absolute favorite. I still have my Revenge of the Sith light up Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber, because I don't like to get rid of things. I'm a pack rat. So I still have these things that made me really happy from when I was a kid. So I'm like really, I feel obligated to at least sort of pay attention to Star Wars. And I always knew that Dune was the thing that inspired it. I had no idea what it was. And in early 2019, late 2018, I got back into reading because I stopped reading when I was in high school and when I was doing my undergrad.
This isn't even that long ago.
Yeah,
I
no.
figured you'd been doing it for like 15 years.
No. I'm a very obsessive when I get, an interest, and Dune was like my life Dune has been my life, I'll say, basically, because I just got into it and I was like, I don't want to stop because it's a drug. And, it feels cool whenever you meet someone that has also read it, because you're like, oh, not a lot of people have actually read this tome. That's really cool.
Surprisingly.
But yeah, so I actually started reading it early 2019, right when we started Suck My Fan Fic, actually. And then I got put into my grad program, and I started my grad program. And I mean, grad program, you're reading basically like 2 novels a week worth of material, at least for one that I'm in. And I was doing all this reading, and the only reason why I read Dune, or one of the reasons why I read Dune, is because I was like, I'm going to be reading a lot in grad school. I should just get used to reading this much right now. And thankfully I did, because I loved it. But the whole entire time, that whole fall, I was just sitting there and I was like, man, and I was looking at Messiah on my shelf because I had bought it. And I was like, I just want to read that. And so at the moment the semester was over, I burned through Messiah. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll do Children. And I burned through that, and then, I burned through the rest. So I knew it because of that. I watched a PewDiePie video where he did a book review and he just talked about it. And I was like, man, that does seem really interesting. And then
I
finally,
didn't know anybody actually watched PewDiePie videos.
You're the first I've ever.
I thought he was just this meme.
Yeah, he's a meme. Yeah, but it was weird because it was like PewDiePie book review. I'm like, well, that's got to have something in it. What's this guy reading? And then the last kind of component is I was in the Strand in New York, which is an independent bookstore, which is really big up there. And they just had the I don't know if you've seen the copy with the orange contrasted with the black background for the space and the two moon or the two moons and or the two suns and the guy walking through the desert as a silhouette. And the art for that book was just like so cool. And I was like, I'm gonna judge a book by its cover. That looks awesome. And I just kind of put all that together, and I was like, I'll just take a shot. I'll just buy it. Oh, I did it, and it paid off. And the mass market paperback version's only like $8, so I was like, I can afford that because when you're in New York, you can't even really afford food, but I could afford $8 for a book, and I loved it. So that's kind of where I got started with it.
So your interpretation of Dune and how you got into it is exactly what I was with A Song of Ice and Fire. Is I watched Game of Thrones, the first season. I got into Game of Thrones like right before the second season. I watched the first season, and then the second season was about to start, so I rewatched it right away. Watched the second season. Then the third season was coming. I rewatched 1 and 2, watched 3. Same thing with 4, and then 5. And then 5 is where everything starts to go off the rails, and just you lose so much information in season 5 that feels like it should be important. And I'm just like, I need to know what's going on. And I started looking things on Wiki. I was on all these Quora question and answer boards, looking at shit there, just trying to like fill in these gaps. And then I'm just like, fuck it, I'm gonna read it. And so I started reading it, and then I got further and further into it, read more on the Wiki every day. I was checking the Wiki for new little facts, and I've got all the books now and all the appendixes and all this other bullshit that has been created around it, and it's great. And with Dune, I think it's Ryan, but it might be you, that has been stoked on binge mode twice.
It's Ryan.
Yeah, that's Ryan. That's a podcast I listen to, and Mallory Rubin, one of the hosts of that, has a very like special memory of Dune, of her father giving her a book, and he wrote a transcription in it, or an inscription in it and everything, when he sent her to college. And I always knew it was like the seminal sci-fi story that laid the groundwork for all this other stuff, kind of like you said with Star Wars. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind, and then she mentioned it, I'm like, okay, I'll put it on my reading list. 21 hours is a lot to kind of chug through, especially since I did A Song of Ice and Fire, I did Harry Potter. I needed shorter stuff for a little while. And then you, with your constant Dune talk on Suck My Fan Fic, finally pushed me over the edge, and now here we are doing a podcast about it. So, and Nick, I think you were kind of on the same boat as me. You and I had never really read it, and we were both like, Alex talks about it. It sounds good. Let's read it.
Yeah,
an episode.
He seems really convincing, so I'll give it a shot.
Go ahead, I'm gonna work my magic for the rest of these books. I swear to God.
Oh, you already know I'm gonna pick this shit up. I'm gonna be like, honey, I need the rest of the books for Christmas, please.
I'm gonna start having action. They already got the action figures for the new movie at Target. I've seen them. They look awesome, but I can't buy them.
Did you pick one up? What?
I have to get one.
They're
now.
so dope.
Yeah.
I have to consume the media from it first.
Yes.
I
have
the awesome Dark Knights Metals figures. I couldn't buy one until I read the stupid Dark Knight Metals story. And I read it, and I went out and bought my Flash and my Green Lantern, and I never want to visit it again.
Yeah, even though that story is pretty awful, and Death Metal is somehow worse. I'm reading Death Metal right now. And
I don't know how you could get worse than.
Not a fan.
Oh, Dark Knight's Metal was terrible.
Don't read Death Metal then, because it just takes a total dump on your chest.
I read it. I got my cool.
That's where I don't like my dumps.
Batman Flash action figure. I got the Batman Green Lantern figure. I'm good. I'm done.
That's Red Death, and what's the Batman Green
Red
Lantern?
Death. Daybreaker.
Daybreaker, yeah.
Or Dawnbreaker.
Daybreaker,
yeah, whatever.
Dawnbreaker, that's a... Yeah, I mean, King in Black 1, dope.
It's just Scott Snyder trying to have a big brain and be Alan Moore when he's not. That's all that is.
It does not work.
No, he's not Alan.
So let's get away from Dark Knight Metals and back to what do you like best about the Duneverse?
So... I know I already mentioned it. I mention obnoxiously all the time. I do anthropology stuff. I'm a cultural anthropologist. Actually, that's like feels weird to say, but that's like my actual profession. And
fuck, I wish, man, that'd be amazing.
Oh,
I didn't know it was a profession.
It's so much fun. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I love what I do. No complaints whatsoever.
Big fan of my job.
No, like, hey, how many people do you talk to that are like, oh, I love my job?
Yeah, no,
you know,
that's fair.
So I love my job. I love what I do. I love studying other cultures. I love learning about people. I love trying to understand people with different perspectives. And, as I'm gearing up for grad school to do all this stuff and I'm reading about other cultures, I pick up the sci-fi book, and there's not only this like native culture on this planet, but there's this imperial culture, and you get this like colonizer-colonized relationship, which is really important in anthropology. And then you get this like long history that is barely even discussed. And, I'm interdisciplinary with history. And so you just kind of, you hit every single intellectual G-spot you could find with this book for me, because you're getting history, you're getting religion, you're getting culture, you're getting action, you're getting politics, you're getting economics. I mean, it is just, I've never seen, an intellectual property that is so involved in all of that, because it doesn't lack any of it. And besides that, it's just so well written. So I kind of read the first one, and I was just so amazed that, you could tell me, like, I know for a fact both of you could tell me the religious practices of the Fremen, and I'd like to know if you could tell me the religious practices of like the Inuit in Canada. Like, you know what I mean? Like the Fremen are so believable, and the culture is just so believable that, when you try to compare it to things in real world, you're like, I don't know anything about these things because this is so much more interesting, and like, it just feels real. And, living in that space with giant sandworms and a spice drug that makes you see into the future, it just feels, it feels like real life. And I've never had that experience with a book before.
So I think that was the other part that I was missing in the first read through, is all I knew about it was that scene from the 1984 movie where Kyle MacLachlan's running away from the giant sandworm. So I thought this was all giant sandworms constantly attacking people.
No,
and it's not. No. There's like 3 giant sandworms throughout the whole first story.
Yeah.
And so I kind of kept waiting for them to actually pop up, and they didn't. And so that was another, my expectations were different than what was actually there. Not that it was bad that it was different. I found myself scrambling for things that didn't exist, and the things that were there were probably better than what I was expecting.
It's not Tremors.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely, that's honestly what I kind of had in the back of my mind. But, dude, you literally have my fucking dream job. That would be amazing.
Are you hiring? You got 2 employees right here.
Hey, if we get off the podcast, I can give you all the info to apply.
Yeah, I don't know about all that.
Application is due in 16 days.
Okay, I'm fucking there. Let me get the credentials.
Let's get it.
But that's what screamed out to me was the Fremen culture from the entire book. Every time they mentioned a new aspect of the Fremen culture or their language or their customs, I was all fucking in. And that would be really what would drag me into future books, is learning more about the Fremen and their progression. Because I want to see the end result of this, universal nomad species of people.
We're trying to terraform an entire planet just out of their own technology they've developed.
And with the aid of a weird spice and the manipulation of giant sandworms and a horribly inclement climate. Like, that is fucking fantastic to me.
Was that something else that I picked up on? And I'm going to ask you what are the top 3 things in a minute that we probably missed our first read through. Nick probably has caught some of these now because he's done it twice, but I haven't. Was that something I picked up on, is that the Fremen technology was actually in a way more advanced than the other societies, because they were kind of using these, I guess they would be older computer components to build technology to do things that the other communities on Arrakis hadn't figured out how to do because they didn't understand the older technology. Is that what was going on with them?
I'm going to give you the answer that one of my professors would give me, which is, isn't better a subjective word?
Well, yeah.
So the answer,
it's a sticky bomb.
The answer is it's they're better suited. Their technology is better suited to the climate.
Yeah.
And so one of the, you have to think about, again, like I said, I like to read it contextually. 1965. Frank Herbert didn't do it by himself, but he's one of the first people to talk about ecology and systems, because ecology, when you're talking about environments, is all about systems and all about, cycles. And here we have a planetary ecologist, which that ecology wasn't even really a word at that point. It was, but it wasn't this, this thing that people knew. You had a planetary ecologist whose whole job, by the way, Liet Kynes is one of my favorite characters,
He's pretty
someone's
cool.
He's fantastic.
whose whole job is to go there and learn about the environment and how it operates and how it functions. And to make it even more like real life, you have this empire that sent that person there to learn how to extract the most amount of resources and value out of that place. Please tell me if that sounds like real life.
Absolutely.
So
it was very.
It sounds even
believable.
more like real life because the resource they were going after was probably not. It was the most valuable at the time.
oil?
But what
No,
the
spice,
Fremen were
spice,
doing that.
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, the spice.
Not
What
oil.
the Fremen
Who
were
said something
doing.
about oil?
What the Fremen were doing with that spice was going to be way more beneficial than how the Empire saw to use it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like
They had a long-term goal.
they did.
Yes.
And it's funny because one of the things you kind of learn, especially
Well, they knew how to make the spice, which is helpful.
yeah, but especially with a Fremen, you kind of realize that it's like destination and not the journey, because
Mhm.
it's not much of a spoiler. In later books, as the planet starts to get terraformed, the Fremen start losing their culture because they're no longer in that environment anymore, and that's actually one big thing.
Yeah, they're not the hard men.
Exactly, and that's one of the big things with cultural anthropology is you kind of get into this conversation of, is your culture influenced by the environment, or does your culture influence the environment? Like which one influences the other more? I fall on the side of environmental determinism, which is your culture is really shaped by the environment that it's in. And so you have this book, which I think kind of makes an argument as well. And by the way, at the time he was reading people like Levi Strauss and Franz Boas and all these really important anthropologists, and that's how he was interpreting how to make his own culture. So he's very well informed. He's not a dumb guy in the slightest. And since I do believe in environmental determinism, you have this culture that is 100% based around the desert and 100% based around the worm,
Water.
and that, I mean, look at that water. You don't give when you give water for the dead, that's a big thing. And when someone dies, the water goes back to the tribe. Like they drain them of their blood and somehow find a way to use that moisture. They have these special things called still suits to trap all the moisture in their bodies and not lose any of it.
So amazing.
So you have these cultural components, and they start manifesting themselves in the language of the people, the cultural practices, the religion, all these different things, and it's all environmentally determined. Like they wouldn't have the burial practices that they do if it wasn't that water was so important. You can't bury that water in the ground. You need that water for the tribe. And so I think that says a lot. And so the ecological aspects that Frank integrated, the cultural aspects, I mean, it's just, I really cannot applaud them enough. They are just so good.
That's exactly. I was trying to explain what Dune is to the buddy I mentioned earlier, and that was what I kept coming back to.
Giant
was the way
sandworms.
Yeah, I mean, giant sandworms, blue eyes, and this bitch named Princess Irulan that's telling me all these stories.
You don't even know who she is until the last chapter.
I was kind of pissed about that.
Well, the
No
first
lie, every
5
time-
chapters, I kept reminding him, like, did I miss who Princess Irulan is? Is it his mom? Like, is she going by a different name? Is it his soon-to-be wife? Is it the little girl that he has a vision of in the cave? I didn't get it.
Watch the movie in
Well, once
1984,
they-
and she's in the first 5 minutes of the movie. She actually gives the prologue. Princess Irulan does.
Oh my god. Once you established who Muad'Dib was, I kind of was able to pick it up from there, but at the same time, it felt kind of spoiler-ish. Like, there was things that she would say, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and guess that he spends more time in the desert in this chapter.
Yeah, but see, to me, that's part of the appeal. That's that writing technique is called an epigraph. And the epigraphs are really, really appealing to me because I feel like, again, it's J.J. Abrams' mystery box, but good. Like, you're given this little tiny breadcrumb of an idea, and you know it's going to happen. And you're like, I don't even care that I know it's going to happen. I just want to know how it gets there. And I think, for me, it's like that pursuit of, well, what's the explanation behind this is so, like, intellectually intriguing and so engaging that I'm like, all right, I'll just keep reading.
I agree. I had a hard time with them sometimes because listening, I couldn't tell if they came at the front of the chapter or at the end of the chapter. So I would try listening to them intently to kind of see what they were referring to. and then I'd just be like, okay, is that referring back to something that just happened or something that's about to happen? And I'd get lost. I'd miss like the first 3 minutes of the next chapter trying to figure out what it meant.
Yeah.
And that's something on the next read through that I would go through easier, that I wouldn't spend so much time drifting.
It definitely helps. And I mean, that's the same kind of technique I use for descriptions of the episode for my podcast, and then, you know, I expand upon it within the context of the episode. Yeah. So, you know, I understand the way it's put together. I don't know if I'm necessarily a fan of it, so I might have to change that about my own show. Fuck.
Yeah, and that's one good thing about consuming these things is, you know, we're learning these techniques from an actual master of writing. You know, I mean, this guy is, you can tell he's very good at his craft, and you can choose to use them or exclude them in your own work, but you know how to make them work for sure because he's doing them perfectly.
Oh my.
Nick, I will say, just as myself, I understand everything that you've said in your story way more than I understand most of the stuff that was happening in Dune. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do understand what's going on in your story.
I hope
I don't ever get like lost just trying to contemplate why this word exists.
I don't make up too many words, mostly because I don't want to sound like a fucking idiot and accidentally use something that would offend someone, which sounds, I don't know if someone wants to call me a snowball for that shit, because that's something I don't really like fucking with, is people's language and culture in that regard. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of a low blow.
So, Alex, top 3 things that we probably missed our first read through that are important to the story that we should have picked up on.
See, I'm just going to be a total turd and just say I don't know what you missed. I mean, you're the one that read the book. I don't know what you picked up on or you missed.
I love it. I mean, slow clap for that response.
I can think about things that become bigger later down the road.
Yeah, let's try that.
Yeah, because how do I know what you know? I don't know. I don't know what I know.
Well, that's true.
I have one thing that thoroughly missed.
Maybe we should try and do that. Nick, you say your thing, and I'll say something that I picked up that maybe I should have missed.
Okay.
Well, or maybe I think other people would miss. So, Nick, what was your thing?
Well, I completely missed, even on the second time through, when I was thinking about it, what happened to Duncan, Idaho.
Okay.
I don't know what the fuck happened to me, but I just completely lost him in the rest of the story.
He gets killed. What do you mean, what happens to Duncan?
Well, and I know he dies, but for some reason it didn't distinctly stick in my head how he dies. I know...
Heroically defending them from the Sardaukar.
In the initial Harkonnen raid, right?
Yes, the first one, yeah.
Yeah, and that's... So, yeah.
It's an off-screen death,
that was
right?
Just the only thing...
It's off-screen. Yeah.
Well, same with Paul's son getting killed off-screen. So I guess maybe that's
that one was hard for me to take. Was like the son is just... Cheney shows up and she's like, yeah, your son's dead. We couldn't predict.
My son is dead.
Yep.
Yeah, But at the same time, it worked. Like it kind of fucking worked because you spent zero time with, the son
didn't matter. The son literally had no page time. I think he goes and sees him one time in the whatever the little community outside the normal community that all the women are in. Did I pick that up right? That there's a separate community that the women go to.
Yeah,
South.
Well, because it's not. How do they pronounce it in the book? Seich or Seich?
Seich.
Seich. It's not Seich Tabor or Tabir. It's the other one that they're hanging out in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Seich Tabor.
Yeah.
Tabor.
It's not that one. It's the other one they hang out in to protect them. Leto, his son, named after his father. He does die, but I mean I guess that I interpreted that as giving him more of a reason to go fight the Harkonnens because they killed his kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense, and it's there for a reason. I felt blindsided by it. I'm like, this kid can't be dead. We just met him, and there's 6 more books.
Well, that's what happens.
He was more important than Paul would be.
That's what happens when a kid dies. It's like, this kid can't be dead. I just met him. He's dead.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
This doesn't make any sense. He was just a baby.
So another thing that I picked up on was the technology thing I pointed out earlier, and then the so they use the teeth of the worms create the spice, right? The teeth cutting through the sand creates the spice.
No.
Is that right?
No.
No, spice is just there.
No.
And
both of those are no.
No. The spice is made somehow.
I thought it was basically like a resource.
That's what the Empire thinks.
Yes. You guys, so
that's not true because they call the worms makers.
Yes, they are makers.
And the teeth are sacred to them. They have the teeth knives.
The Chris knives. Yeah.
The Chris knives. Yeah, once somebody sees it, you have to kill that person. They're not allowed to leave the planet without being killed.
Yeah.
You have to quench their blood.
And then the thing goes on in he goes in the cave and something happens down there with a maker.
Yeah. So
he drinks its sacred water.
And then that's when he wakes up and he's like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna be this dude."
Do they just blend it up and like throw it in a bag or something?
No.
And that's what fucked him up?
Mm-mm.
So I guess that's what I missed then is what's actually going on there.
So I can to give you the first little breadcrumb and be better than J.J. Abrams. The Arrakis originally was not a desert. It has not always been a desert.
Right.
Nobody knows how the worms got there, but it's thought that they're not native to Arrakis, but nobody knows how they got there. And you kind of learn more about the life cycle of the worm in 2 and 3, and that becomes a really important part of the book. And spoiler, because this is the life cycle of the spice. There's sandworms, and there are these things that are referenced. I don't even think they're in the first book, called sand trouts. And sand trouts are much smaller. Yeah, sand trouts are much smaller, and they're the ones that are actually capable of drinking water. And when they multiply to this great extent, they soak up all the water. And then the water gets put, below ground or within the sand trout, or the Fremen start collecting as much as they can and, putting in their reservoirs, their basins. And so all of the water of the planet is actually below the surface. And the sand trouts actually protect the sandworms by hoarding the water. Because if a sandworm touches water, it dies, like immediately. And the one that you're referring to was a small sandworm that had touched water and then produced the spice of life, which is a highly concentrated form of melange. And that's when Paul trips balls into the fourth dimension.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they kept a small sandworm and then killed it. And the sand trout can actually grow to become sandworms later down the line. There's a life cycle of the worm. So that's how you get that whole thing going on. It was not always a desert. To spoil the books further down the line, it is not always a desert. Like I said, it really becomes about ecology, and it really becomes about cycles and systems. And some of the people who rule the planet are much better about understanding that than others.
I'd imagine. It's kind of how it goes through history.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, so let's go complete spoilers. And
all right.
I sent you the outline.
Yeah.
And I framed it two ways: what happens next with kind of these major players, major places, or also a brief synopsis of each book. Which way do you think it's better to play this game?
Well, first off, I did think about two things you guys probably missed. Now, I'm a little turd. The first one is what's going on with the Bene Tlaxu? What do you think's going on with them?
I don't know what that means.
The Bene Tlaxu. Tlaxu.
Is that the lady who was there that gave the ganja bar test to Paul?
No, that's Reverend Mother Gaius Moichaim. They talk about the Bene Tlaxu, the people that do all the genetic experiments.
I think they touch on it briefly.
They talk about them for
that's
2
not
seconds.
Any...
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I can answer your question.
I think they're doing science experiments on people.
I can answer your question well then. They become major players in book 2. Okay. So you hear about the Bene Gesserit, you kind of realize that they're like this, international or intergalactic, weird space witch thing that's just women. And then you hear Bene Tlaxu, that just gets brushed under the rug, and you're like, all right, that's weird. And you think they're doing experiments on people, and let me tell you, they are. And so you get this one faction from this planet that does genetic experiments. And then what about the Ixians? You know what's going on with them?
Nope.
So you get mentioned the Ixians for 2 seconds.
These are definitely things I missed.
Okay, good. Okay, so I did think of some. You get mentioned the Ixians, IX, the Ixians. You get mentioned the Ixians, and you realize that they're all technology based, and they may or may not be towing the line of where they should be because of the Butlerian Jihad. And you don't know. You're like, what are these guys doing? Are they actually creating computers with the minds of men, though they shouldn't be, because that's against the rules. So you get the Ixians, and then you get a emperor who knows what's going on because he has spies everywhere, and may or may not allow it because he understands that sometimes you need to have people that break the rules. So that's something you missed. You missed the Ben 8 Slack suit. You missed the Ixians. This has nothing to do with the bigger conversation. There's one-off line where they're like, yeah, we don't know how they got their name, the Ixians. Like why the planet was named that way, but it was named thousands of years ago. In my opinion, I think it's interesting to think that it was the 9th planet from whatever star it was in, and they just called it IX, and then it just became Ix. But I don't know if that's real or not.
I like it.
I'm guessing that's what it is.
I'm taking that.
That's
I like
my
that
guess.
too.
Yep. That's the right answer. We had to cut this episode a little short, broke it into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2 now. Alex just has an amazing breadth of knowledge on the subject of Dune, so we couldn't fit it all into one digestible episode. We broke it into 2. If you want part 2, where we talk about the rest of the extended Duneverse, the rest of Frank Herbert's books, and the books his son created afterwards, and kind of some of the ancillary stuff that goes along with it, tune in next week for part 2. Alex is back with a lot more knowledge and just goes super deep on everything that happens in the Duneverse, and it's really exciting. So if you enjoyed this, you'll enjoy what we have left next week. We also talk about the 1984 movie a little bit, and the upcoming 2021 movie where Timothée Chalamet plays Paul Muad'Dib, and how excited we are about that entire cast and what Denis Villeneuve is going to do with the film series. So come back next week. Check us out on Twitter in the meantime at APA something @alone_podcast. And as always, stay classy.